In this episode, I'm continuing the build of the Amati 1-100 Chinese Junk. This portion of the build involves the deck planking and a few associated bits of deck furniture, as well as the rudder. Unlike the bow of European galleons, the Chinese Junk has a very flat bow. Overhanging that bow is a flat platform used for a fighting platform for crossbowmen, as well as to help in sail handling and mooring. Two cantilever supports, laser cut in 1/16 plywood, are placed on the bow to support that platform. The platform itself is also laser cut in 1/16 ply. The platform will be decked with 1x3mm basswood strips. To get started, I mark a line using a square to keep the planking straight. The individual strips of deck planking can tend to blend together and look like a single sheet rather than individual strips, especially if you have to sand it. To keep some separation between strips, I run a soft pencil down the edges of each plank on the sides that will butt to each other. By trial and error, I found that an old wooden pencil works better for this than a drafting lead. Use HB, B, or a number 2 so you get a nice black edge. I glued up the strips without trying to make them fit the pre-cut platform perfectly. Once dry, the plywood makes a perfect guide for trimming and sanding the strips to size. After final shaping, the platform is edged with 1x2mm walnut strips. I began the deck planking by gluing the first plank along the line exactly midship. This goes across the holes where the mast will go, so mark and/or cut access for the mast now. Trust me on this, if you cover these holes completely, they are very difficult to precisely locate later. I then worked my way out to the sides a plank at a time. Here I like to introduce a joint now and then at a frame. This is more realistic and makes for a visually interesting deck. As you near the sides, a bit of trimming will be needed to accommodate the curve of the ship. If you really want to get detailed, the decking of a sailing ship has some really finer points that appeal to the most OCD of modelers. Planks were never tapered to a sharp point. They always had a small rectangular nose left to avoid cracking, and they used a special plank called a nibbling strake or a margin plank. Since this is a fun build for me, I've opted to just let the deck planks run out to a point, and I'm going to cover any gaps with a beveled 2mm square walnut strip running around the edge of the deck. I'm not entering any contests or shows, and it'll look just as nice when it's up on the shelf. But you do you. At the stern of the junk, the ship's house has a roof that is mercifully laser pre-cut in 1/16 ply and will receive deck planking on its surface as well. I started by marking a center line to begin the planking. Just like the main deck, I worked out from the center, making sure to mark a hole for the mizzenmast. At this point, I decided to attach the laser pre-cut sternhouse window panels. This kit includes dry decals that can be used on these parts, but I found them to be too shiny and too cartoonish for my taste. I elected to just paint them with some Tamiya acrylic and highlight the window frames with some gold paint. This area of the ship will be mostly unseen, so it's a fair compromise. There are two posts that fit into the notches of the sternhouse, so I added those at this time. I also edged that deck in 1x2mm walnut strips. There's a final small platform on the stern, in what might be called the poop deck of a European sailing ship, but before adding this platform, the rudder must be constructed and placed. This is because the rudder's tiller extends from under that platform, and it's easy to attach the tiller at this point. Although it serves the same purpose, the rudder of a junk is built and mounted differently from a European ship. It is considerably larger, made of many wide but thin planks mortised and tenoned into a flat structure supported by a frame made of hardwoods. This frame was necessary to support the stresses on the rudder during hard steering. One source I came across stated that larger junks would require as many as 20 men to man the tiller during storms or heavy seas. The rudder could also be adjusted for height to avoid grounding or damage, as junks were often used in shallow waters. The rudder is secured to the rudder post with cordage, which I simulated with black sewing thread. The tiller was created from a cocktail toothpick. You know you are a modeler if you look at a martini and see a source of parts for a project. Thankfully, there are no pintles or gudgeons which are the hinge-like attachment of European rudders used on junks. The rudder on this kit fits into a hole previously shown on episode 2 of this series. So basically I just have to make the rudder the right size and glue it into place. Bazinga! With the rudder attached and the tiller in place, the final small stern platform can be added. It is planked and the edges finished just as the bow platform was. One construction note: when gluing the bow and stern platforms, I used epoxy instead of Titebond wood glue I used throughout the rest of the model. These platforms have very small attachment points and would be great candidates for accidental damage, so the strength of epoxy might prevent this. I like to simulate trennels in the deck to add some visual interest. I do this by using a pin vise with a microbit of about 0.6 or 0.7 millimeters, and I drill a pair of tiny depressions in the end of the planks. I then twirl a pencil in the depressions to mark a dark point. This small detail, along with the edge darkening, really makes the deck more appealing, at least to me. The last additions for this part of the build were some hatch combings and square wooden plates for the entry point of the 3 masts through the deck. At this point, the junk is taking shape and looks a bit like a modern merchant ship if you use your imagination. Next episode, I'll be cutting the gun ports and doing one of my absolute favorite tasks, bringing the hull to life by giving it its first coat of finish. I'm also ready to mount the ship to its permanent base and pedestals prior to rigging and final construction. Thanks for watching this episode. I hope you're having a very relaxing and peaceful day.